Yellow paddle pops up, you have 30 seconds left, and when the red pops up, you are done with your time. I'll do my best to, I'm not going to cut anybody's microphone off, but we're just going to make sure you wrap up your statements and go forward. So with that, Mr. King, your opening statement.
Thanks, Mike. So thank you, first of all, to the Chamber for hosting this event, and thank you for everything you do for our community. I really appreciate you as the Chamber and what you do for us in Juneau. As a professional economist and a small business owner, I understand how difficult things are right now. The economy is really suffering, and we need to do something about it. It's one of the reasons why I decided to run for State House. I want to help stabilize our economy and get us back on solid footing. In my mind, we've been avoiding this conversation for far too long. Our financial situation is getting worse every day, and I just decided that I couldn't stand on the sidelines anymore and wanted to get more actively involved in a solution. The last few years, we've been draining our savings account without accomplishing any tangible progress. And because we've lacked progress while emptying our accounts, we've actually made things worse. It's now time to roll up our sleeves and do the hard work. And that's why I'm here. I'm running because the task at hand is very difficult. It's going to be very challenging, and there are going to be very difficult, tough decisions that are going to have to be made. I'm no stranger to tough decisions. I've been putting service before self my entire life. I started with joining the military, the Army, right out of high school. After 4 years of leading a diverse group of infantrymen, I deployed to Iraq to defend our freedom and protect our country. From that experience, I learned how to lead a team and how to accomplish a mission. I think that's going to be very valuable in the legislature. When I returned home, I went to graduate school at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, where I got a master's degree in applied economics and resource management. I've been using that degree in state service for the last several years. It started with being a petroleum economist at the Department of Revenue, and then I got promoted as a commercial analyst for the Department of Natural Resources. And eventually I worked my way up all the way to the state's chief economist. I have a deep understanding of how our state works, how our statutes are written, how they function, how they are interpreted, and I've been working with legislators and working on legislative policy for several years now. So now I'm looking for another way to serve my state, this time as an elected official. I feel like I have the experience, the education, and the right relationships that are necessary to provide Juneau with a strong voice during these difficult negotiations. So I'd appreciate your vote.
Thank you, Mr. King. We appreciate putting your name in the hat, and thank you for your service to our country and to our state. Representative Story, it is your turn for your opening statement.
Thank you. I'm Andi Story. I've lived in Juneau for over 30 years, and like you, I care deeply about our community and state. I'd like to thank everyone at Chamber for all you do, especially for being seen as a welcoming capital city. I've seen up close how that matters. I will continue to champion Juneau as Alaska's capital city, keeping sessions and state jobs here. It's been an intense 2 years dealing with how to provide constitutionally mandated services, protecting the permanent fund, now Alaska's largest reoccurring revenue source, as we've been able to keep to the sustainable draw, and providing for a dividend, all within lower revenue due to the low oil and production prices, and a desire to keep Alaska as a low tax state. That's meant we have almost gone through our savings, and most recently we are reeling from the economic losses because of the coronavirus. What's at stake? What's been at stake? Our economy and our quality of life. All business owners know that stability is critical to planning and growth. To me, that is the most critical job ahead of the legislature, to finally deliver on and achieve a stable balance of revenues and expenditures so businesses and families can know to expect a quality of life here. Most citizens expect expenditures to provide quality essential services that they value and not continue deep cuts to them. I saw this with the public outcry over the governor's 2019 budget vetoes, including the Juneau Chamber's letter and other municipalities and citizens asking the legislature to override his vetoes. What I hear valued in our state services are education, and education is an economic and workforce issue. Health and senior care, public safety, jobs, community assistance, and infrastructure. We need to get people to work. I propose putting a statewide general obligation bond on the ballot to address deferred maintenance and infrastructure needs. The money from a GEO bond can target projects that receive federal dollar matches, 90% for highways, including marine highways, 95 for airports, and 50% for outdoor economic related projects. To deliver on a fiscal plan that addresses essential services, protects our permanent fund, provides a dividend, and strategic investments will require additional revenues. I remain open to any and all revenue sources. I believe we can still keep Alaska a low tax state. I will not support a fiscal plan that has huge cuts to services for seniors, ferries, education, and our permanent fund. I will protect a dividend for generations to come. I'm proud to be part of a bipartisan coalition who's working for a sustainable, balanced budget that protects services and our quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Story, and thanks for your service on the school board and as our representative for the last 2 years. All right, we'll go into our questions. Hopefully we're going to cover a lot of ground here, from some of the Juneau Chamber priorities to the fiscal situation to the COVID crisis. But we'll go ahead and start in. We'll alternate who answers first on each one. And as I said before, we did not provide these questions to the candidates beforehand, but our first question should absolutely be no surprise. The Juneau Chamber believes that the Juneau Access Project will be transformational for our community and our economy and is vital to our future. What specifically will you do to advocate for this project? Representative Story, you go first.
I too agree that Juneau Access, all our access to our capital city should be affordable, reliable, and give citizens across the state access to their capital. I've learned from my time in the legislature that the majority of Alaskans from across the state want road access to their capital. It's more than just about Juneau. With the lack of ferry support for funding by the governor and some legislators, it makes Juneau Access even more important. I support a ferry terminal at Cascade Point. I think that will help be an interim measure to keep Juneau Access going. Right now, Juneau Access has been in the governor's hands. It's his decision to go and convince the federal government that we have an economic situation. The reason why it was stopped, Governor Walker put it on a no-build plan, and he did that saying that our situation, financial situation was not good. We could not afford to go ahead with it. So it's on no build. So Governor Dunleavy has to say, yes, we have a fiscal plan, we can go forward. And so part of this fiscal plan affects so many things. So I'll advocate for Cascade Point. I will advocate for encouraging the governor and all of us to come together on that. And I think educate our community about the importance of Juneau Access Road so we can come together on that and see how it can work well. We'll still have good ferry service, and I think we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Story. And I should mention, as we do go through the questions, for the second person to answer, if you do need me to repeat the question, just let me know. But Mr. King, same question.
Thanks, Mike. And the question being, what would I do as a legislator to actually help move the road forward? I think that's fairly important. I think all of us agree that the road is important and understand how important it would be to our community, bringing down our cost of living, increasing access, making sure that we remain a strong capital city. What we haven't had is anybody in the legislature working with the governor and advocating to get that project moving forward. We've already got the money. The money's already been budgeted. The 90% federal match is there if we just put it in the STIP and actually get it moving forward. But we don't have anybody in our Juneau delegation that's getting up into the third floor of the Capitol building and talking with the governor's office and actually pushing that project forward. It's not enough to just simply sit back and point fingers at what other people aren't doing. You have to get in there and actually work with them and move it forward. I think that's one of the things that have been lacking. That's one of the reasons why it hasn't moved forward. That's one of the things that I can bring to the table, is that relationship that I have with the governor's office and with the administration, with the Department of Transportation, with other legislators that can actually progress that project. That's what I would do.
Thank you, Mr. King. And we appreciate both of the answers there. And I'll just reiterate that, you know, Juneau access, road access to our capital city is so very critical to all of us at the Juneau Chamber and throughout our community. All right, our next question. The COVID-19 pandemic has turned our world upside down and has had devastating impacts to our community. There's not a single segment of Juneau's economy that hasn't been impacted by this crisis. What is the role of the legislature in stabilizing and rebuilding our economy, both statewide and locally? And how will you ensure that Juneau has the resources it needs? Mr. King, we'll start with you.
Yeah, great question. And as I said right from the very beginning of this pandemic, I was kind of proposing the fact, or pointing out the fact that as an economist, what's really critical is that as we're protecting public health, we don't sacrifice our economic health. And we have to find ways so that when the economy does open back up, it can just be reopened and not have to be rebuilt. We were really fortunate that we got federal funding, and we were really fortunate that we were able to use some of that federal funding for local programs. We were very unfortunate that the legislature didn't take more action to actually help the economy move forward. They did do a few things, but really what happened is when things started going a little bit crazy, they gabbled out and went home and didn't really accomplish a whole lot in terms of help for everyday Alaskans. Right now we have hundreds of businesses that are closing down. Small businesses are closing their doors forever. They'll probably never reopen. They are suffering. Those jobs associated with those small businesses are suffering. They're probably gone for a long time. We're now at a point where that federal funding isn't happening anymore. The next legislature is going to have to come in. They're going to have to step up, and they're going to have to find ways that they can support small businesses, keep them from closing down, help them keep their lights on, so that when the time is right and things are safe, so that we can fully reopen and everybody feels comfortable participating in the economy fully, that those businesses are ready to accept that business and accept those workers back. So we need to do more. We need to do grant programs. We need to do zero interest loans. We need to do a capital budget. We need to do whatever we can as a government to help the economy stay strong.
Thank you, Mr. King. Representative Story.
Very important question. Excuse me. I think it's one we have been trying to work very closely with the federal delegation on. I know we've been watching in the news about, will there be another stimulus plan? And there's, I really think there will be. And we just got a letter, the legislator did from the Alaska Municipal League from Nils Andreasen, saying how he feels our municipalities have done a really good job of getting the federal dollars to our communities. And I see my role as a state legislature, when another fiscal package comes, to make sure we use that route, because local communities know what their citizens need. We really need to, this is a public health and an economic crisis. So we need to really work on following the public health mandates and protocols, because that's what'll get us back to work. That's what'll get our students back in school, which makes it so much easier for parents to work. For our businesses, we need to definitely make sure that we're able to reallocate any of the money that hasn't been spent. I know the Municipal League is working on that. We need to be looking at that we are putting in the best future package for them, and making sure that we deliver on a fiscal plan, because that is what's going to provide certainty going forward. And please hold, it just is, I just can't, we're going to probably say it a lot in this session, but providing that fiscal plan, that certainty for businesses, money for capital projects. We need to deliver on that early. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Story. And it's a good segue into our next two questions, which will focus on fiscal issues at the state. So the first question will be on the earnings of the permanent fund, and then the second question will be on some more generic levers that can be pulled for a sustainable fiscal plan. So let's go with the first question. The Juneau Chamber is on record stating that utilizing a portion of the earnings of the permanent fund for government is a critical piece of a sustainable fiscal plan. If elected, do you believe the earnings of the permanent fund should be used to fund government? And if so, should some sort of dividend still be paid to Alaskans? And Representative Story, you get to go first.
I definitely believe we should continue our dividend program for Alaskans, and I believe that the earnings of our permanent fund should be used to provide for essential services. That is what the original intent was, Governor Hammond, and all this is our crowning achievement of government policy, is that we took a non-renewable resource and we made it renewable for generations to come. And that is what we are using as our main source of revenue right now, is our permanent fund earnings. We need to protect that. We do not need to go over the sustainable draw. Now we have to decide about how big should a permanent fund dividend be. That is a question that I think the people need to have, and your elected leaders need to be having conversations on, because the idea to have a regular permanent fund dividend, the average dividend has been $1,200 over the 43 years of the program. And to be able to keep a regular dividend going, because it matters to families very much, and businesses, because that money does cycle through our economy, is something that I think is really important to continue doing for our children and our children's children. So it needs to be a reasonable dividend, and we will need to use state services state earnings from our permanent fund. If we don't, then I believe we would become would have to look at too high of it, being a too high tax state. I think we would have to turn to that, because citizens do want to have services that are good. Businesses will be able to keep and attract people when we can provide for essential services for our community. So it just works hand in hand with the strong economic future for Alaska.
Thank you, Representative Story. Mr. King.
Thanks, Mike. So I go right back to the Constitution. You look at 1976 amendment to the Constitution that created the permanent fund. You look at the last line of that amendment. It says all earnings from the permanent fund go to the general fund. Those earnings are designed to be used by the government. Now we talked about, or the legislature had a conversation around what's the right split for that, on how we should use that money. And they came to the conclusion that it should be 50-50. We use half of it for government, we use half of it for a dividend. And that's what we've been living with for 40 years. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. The thing is that every penny of those earnings that come from the permanent fund are available for appropriation. And it doesn't make any sense for us right now to be increasing our savings accounts while we're going through the worst economic crisis of our lifetime. And so we really need to make sure that we're not sticking to rigid rules just for the sake of the bureaucracy of it. And we're actually looking at our assets and making sure that we're using them the best way that we can. We do have enough money. We do have enough earnings. We do have enough if we have enough willpower and we are creative enough and we're determined enough, we can create a structure that is a long-term sustainable permanent fiscal plan without sacrificing the dividend. The dividend has been sacrificed for 6 consecutive years without involving the public in that conversation whatsoever. We need to be brave enough to include the public in our public policy. And we can't keep telling the people what they need to do. We need to involve them in that conversation and the people will recognize that if we want to continue to pay a full PFD according to the statute, that's probably going to mean we need to do something different with our taxes or budget. And so let's include the people. Let's have that conversation. Let's be grown-ups. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. King. So the second question on the fiscal situation, now that we've discussed the permanent fund, and thanks for keeping the permanent fund in 2 minutes, let's move into the other components of creating a sustainable fiscal plan. Budget cuts and new taxes are the 2 primary levers that have been considered in the past, but pushing too hard on either of those levers could result in negative consequences to our community and our businesses. What do you believe are the key levers of a sustainable fiscal plan, and how do you pull them? Mr. King.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I say that the first thing that we need to do is fix the way that we talk about the budget, the way that we approach our finances in the first place. We need to think about the way that we run government, the way that every other government runs itself. That is, we first determine what we need to provide, the services that we're willing to pay for, figure out what the needs of the community are, and then we can talk about what the funding is. We've been doing this backwards in Alaska for over 40 years now because we've had so much revenue. We've been looking at the revenue first and then deciding how to spend it. That's backwards. We need to fix that. And the only way you can fix that is with a constitutional amendment that creates that structure that provides more stability. That's what I keep coming back to. That's the first thing, the very first thing, the most important thing that we can do is create that structure. Once we have that conversation, then we can start talking about whether our financial assets are optimized, whether our government is right sized, whether our programs are being run efficiently, whether there's new technology like we've been experiencing for the last 6 months that can drive down some of those program costs. We need to be really creative. We need to be very determined to provide the services at the lowest possible cost, the services that we want at the lowest possible cost. We haven't done that. And then we have to talk about priorities. We have to talk about where that priority, what we want to fund and where we want to draw that line before we start talking about taxes. We're probably going to get to a point where there's still going to be a gap. So we're going to have to talk about revenues. And we're going to have a really long, hard, difficult conversation around what that looks like. But we cannot balance the budget on the backs of working Alaskans, and we can't balance the budget by cutting programs that are necessary for a functioning community. We have to do something that spreads the load. And that's the only way. I've been saying this for years. That's the only way that we can come to a long-term sustainable solution, is we need to figure out a balanced approach to getting there.
Thank you, Mr. King. Representative Story.
Key levers that I think are so important for the health of our economy in our state, protecting the permanent fund and the dividend. Remember, the permanent fund is our biggest source of revenue now. I do not want to go over the sustainable draw. For every billion we go over, we lose 50 million in interest earnings. That's 50 million each year forever. And then we lose more interest earnings on the whole fund, the smaller it goes. So that's one. The other one is seek savings while we're sustaining services. I believe savings can be found in energy and healthcare expenditures. When I was on the school board, we reduced our energy costs by 28%. We saved $2 million over 4 years. We can find, and we're looking for savings in right now in shared services in our IT department. We're looking at possible 40 millions in savings. So we're going to always be looking for savings while we're sustaining services. We need to keep an open mind on all revenue sources. We have an outdated tax structure. We can maximize receipt of federal revenues with larger capital matches. That's really important. And there are other creative ideas out there. I've already said we need to put people to work, and I really think we've got good bonding capacity. We need to do a general obligation bond and get our economy going. And I think that this is something we can do. We have many tools at our disposal, and we have many people who are ready to work on this. And so I'm hoping the House Senate and House Finance committees will go on the road again this winter, talking about all these methods, and we're going to deliver on a fiscal plan.
Thank you, Representative Story. So COVID-19 will likely place significant restrictions on how the legislature does business and may limit the public's access to the legislature. Access to legislators is a common talking point for those who want to move the capital. What will you do to secure and defend Juneau as Alaska's capital city, especially as we have to address our pandemic response? Representative Story, it's your turn to go first.
This is really important, and we are always working on this. I think right now, people are concerned about making sure everyone stays healthy, and the capital city has done an excellent job of that. We can be a really safe bubble for legislators coming to town. We can do our work here. Legislative Affairs is already working on it. We also, if any resolution comes before us to do any work virtually, it's so important that that resolution has the words in it only in pandemic situations. We really have to protect the work of us being in the Capitol. This year, I was instrumental in helping get $1 million to upgrade our infrastructure projects, our camera committees, our camera infrastructure, and that helps just make keeping most accessibility of people calling in around our state using the LIO. They know we've tried to do sessions in other places and it's fallen apart. And you have all helped to stabilize that by providing the infrastructure. I know the Alaska Committee worked on that too. So we need to keep having the best equipment here. We need to put parameters around any virtual work because it's critical that we are here. We're all working together. Lots of things happen, just dialogues, questions amongst legislators, and it's important to be in the capital city together. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Story. Mr. King.
Yeah, thanks. So same kind of, I guess, idea. I think that what we're doing right now, this virtual forum is kind of an indication of how we can actually be together without being in the same room. And I think that this is kind of proof positive that you can have access to your legislators, even if you can't enter into the same office as them. And so the Capitol building it's well set up for distance delivery with video conferencing, with phone conferencing. I think that's really good. That's really positive and really kind of reinforces the fact that the Capitol can stay in geo and still and people everywhere in Alaska can still access their legislators. Also, that's really the point of being a legislator is you're supposed to be representing your constituents. You're supposed to be carrying their voice into the Capitol, and you really can't do that unless you're talking to your constituents. So for me, I think it's really important for me to get out in the community instead of asking them to come to me in the Capitol. And I think that's really, really critical is making sure that that access is available, that my phone number is on everybody's speed dial and that everybody has access to me. I know Andi does a really good job of that as well. And I think that that's really important for all of us as candidates, as potential legislators, or as elected officials. You know, we need to be the voice of the people, and we can't do that if we're not listening to them.
Thank you, Mr. King. We'll shift gears a little bit now and look ahead to the upcoming session. We know that our fiscal issues will dominate the conversation and COVID response will be right along with that. But as a legislator, if elected, what will be your first piece of personal legislation this upcoming session? Mr. King, you go first.
So I intend to pre-file a bill that establishes the Alaska Marine Highway Corporation. I think that is the most critical thing for Juneau in terms of personal legislation. That would be the very first thing that I would do, and I would pre-file it because it's critical. We have to fix the governance of our Alaska Marine Highway system, and it's got to happen. I want to push it. I want to make sure that happens. We had a chance to do it in the last legislature. It didn't get it across the finish line. So let's work on it and let's get it there. I would also want to, it wouldn't be personal legislation, but a resolution that puts a constitutional amendment on the ballot for November of 2022. That is a very critical component to creating a long-term sustainable fiscal plan. Is anything that we do in statute can just be immediately undone by the next legislature. So nothing statutory has any durability. We have to do something in the Constitution, and that is the highest priority that I have as a legislator. Is we've got to get that on the ballot and to the people so that we can have some long-term structure around the way that we budget. That's the only way we're ever going to fix this mess. If I still have time, I guess I can go down the list. Yeah. So let's see, what would be another one? Term limits. I think term limits would be a really good conversation to have. We have politicians that make a career out of being politicians. I think putting in some term limits. I know it's hard to get it across because it's politicians that are voting on restricting their own power. So is a spending limit, by the way. So these are hard to get across the finish line. But I think that that's really something. If we spend too much time, if politicians spend too much time outside of the community, they start to become detached for it. And 40 years, 50 years is too long to be in any as a public official, and 20 years is probably too long even that. So I think term limits would be an interesting conversation, but I don't know if we can actually get it going or not. Thank you, Mr. King. Representative Story.
Yes, there's many things that are critical, and of course, the biggest one is the state fiscal plan. And when you think of pre-filing legislation for that, that is really going to, whatever we deliver on that is going to take a team effort. It's going to be a lot of conversations up at the Capitol. You could have the best plan. I could put the best plan forward on to pre-file it. And until I had lots of conversations, many things to look at, and there's a community census, it's not going to happen. And when I say it's going to be a compromise. And so I think when I would start pre-filing my legislation, definitely I would pre-file House Bill 236, which took care of our education needs in that it was 2-year funding. We cannot continue to just rely on 1-year funding for education. We've got to be able to plan. And remember, education is about our economy. We've not increased the base student allocation since 2017. That's flat funding is cuts, and we need to be strategic. The other part of is funding early learning. That again will save us in public safety in expenditures down the road. So we really need to make a change, a systemic change. And that's what education needs, is a systemic change, because our career and technical programs have to match our workforce needs. It's a critical area of our state. We have to look at it from the university level down to the preschool level, and we will have a bright future. That's a priority. We also need 2-year funding for our ferries, so we can have, and that was recommended by the Reshaping Ferry Group, and even doing parts of legislations on the ferry, because again, it's going to all have to come together. That is worked and ideas to put out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Story. So on the ballot this year, we have some ballot measures in addition to electing our representatives here in Juneau. So let's look at the first one. Do you support or oppose ballot measure 1, an act relating to the oil and gas production tax, tax payments, and tax credits, and why? Representative Story, you're up first.
Well, I do have reservations and believe that ballot measure 1 is not perfect. I know Alaska's in a difficult financial situation. I think all of us, citizens and industry, should be at the table to help provide stability for Alaska, and I'm going to vote yes for it. I encourage you to read about this ballot initiative and find out more. I believe passing this measure will be the best opportunity to bring some more revenues into the states. With prices so low, the cost of the oil company is projected to be about $200 million. I believe that's affordable to the industry. I also do not see the current legislation. I just do not see us on our own. Everyone says this is so important. Do it through the legislature. To get a majority of us and the governor to sign it, I don't believe that would happen. I think we would need a supermajority because I think he would veto it. So this is the best way to get some money for our fiscal situation. I also think that we have to remember, I think if it passes, it can be amended. And I believe it would spur the legislature to clean up this ballot measure 1, that would get the governor's support and be a reasonable middle way that would be sustainable to the oil companies and Alaska. So I believe there's pieces in that we can work together on. And so, but I do see it as a critical piece of helping us afford everyone together. And I do not think, I think the oil companies have been, they care about Alaska too. They want good things for their people who work here. So I think we can all work together on this.
Thank you, Representative Story. Mr. King.
Thanks, Mike. So I already voted, and I voted no on this initiative. And I voted no because it's, as Andi just pointed out, it's not a perfect bill. It's not written very well. I've been working on oil tax policy for several years now. I have a professional degree in resource economics, and I've been studying oil taxes in Alaska for the last 7 years. This is a very complicated and complex topic. And it requires a thorough understanding of the tax system in order to make the changes that are being requested. We have to really analyze it and understand what it's going to do to our jobs, what it's going to do to our economy, and whether it's actually going to raise revenues permanently or just temporarily. Because if we're going to solve if we're going to solve the problem temporarily, but create a bigger long-term problem, that's not a good fix. That's not a fix at all. That's just kicking the can. So I don't think that this tax policy was well written. I didn't like the process that it went through, because we should have been able to go through the committee process and make amendments to the bill while it's being drafted, not pass the law and then go back and amend it. We are, as legislators, our job is to pass good laws. And so let's do that. We've amended the oil tax law 6 times in 14 years. The idea that we can't have a conversation about oil taxes is asinine. We have that conversation every single year, and we're going to have that conversation again next year. I think that it's very clear that the public wants us to have a conversation about oil taxes. If I'm in there, I will be having a conversation with the rest of the majority members. We will have a conversation about oil taxes, but let's get it right. Let's do it right. Let's do the process correctly and not throw our economy under the bus doing something poorly so that we have to go back and fix it.
I think Mike may have frozen on us. Eric, do you want to step in and finish off the questions?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Okay, so we're on to question number 8,
Yes.
which is a similar question, is do you support or oppose ballot measure 2, Alaska's Better Elections Initiative, and why? And we'll start with Ed King.
So I voted no on this as well, just because it is, again, very complex, and the right way to deal with complex legislation is through the legislative process. And so I didn't. I wasn't really comfortable with us being a guinea pig for this ranked choice voting system, since we would be, there's only one state, Maine, that's already has it, and they haven't even had one election with ranked choice. So we have no idea how this would play out in a presidential election or even in a gubernatorial election. We have no clue. There's no empirical data that suggests that this would work the way that it's being purported to work. So I would prefer that we wait a little bit, we collect a little bit more information, and we make sure that it actually does function the way that it should. There are some pieces in that legislation that do make a lot of sense, and we as legislators should take a look at some of those things. This dark money issue, very important issue. We should definitely take another look at election financing, and if there are needs for reform, then we should have that conversation as well. The primaries, the political parties can do their primaries however they want. The Democratic Party actually did a ranked choice voting in their primary this last year. We don't need this legislation to do ranked choice voting in the primaries. I don't know, there just wasn't enough that was compelling to me to vote in favor of this, even though there are parts of it that are good. I voted no.
All righty, Representative Story.
On ballot measure 2, I am still unsure. I'm going to a forum again tomorrow to ask some more questions about this issue. I like the idea of going back to open primaries and of course, transparency in political contributions. I think we're all in favor of that. It's the ranked choice voting that I am still grasping with. I do know the Juneau League of Women Voters, who they do their research thoroughly. They had an excellent article in the paper the other day. I encourage all of us to read it. And they're saying they've studied other states who have done this, and there's not many, but they have. And what it is doing, it is getting rid of the extremes in all parties and governing more towards the middle, which I do hear many times in my conversations with people. They want us to think about compromise, working together, and they are finding that that's what ranked choice voting does. It makes sure that people who are running are listening to all perspectives, which we should be doing all the time, but taking them into account and crafting legislation, policies that can move us forward. So I think I'm talking myself into voting for it as I'm talking to you right now, but I still am open on this. And I encourage everyone to be reading more about it. Thank you.
All right, well, congratulations to both of you. You've made it through all 8 of our questions. So you managed to do well. and we managed to overcome losing our moderator, so I will do my best. The next thing on our agenda is closing statements. You each have 3 minutes, and we will start with Representative Story.
I passionately believe that Alaska deserves a healthy economy and healthy people. 2 years ago, I ran to represent House District 34 because I saw how years of cuts, a prolonged recession, and the lack of leadership for a fiscal plan were hurting Juneau families. It's been my honor to represent you in the legislature, but we are still confronted by many of those problems, along with the unexpected challenges like COVID-19. More tough choices need to be made, and they need to be made now. We know Alaska desperately needs a sustainable path forward, and I am not one to leave a job unfinished. With your support, I will continue to work with all citizens, legislators, and the governor to do what's best for Juneau and Alaska. The top issue, of course, is our health and rebuilding a healthy economy. It's time for Alaska to grow again. Even before the coronavirus pandemic, Alaska's boom and bust economy and deep budget cuts were hurting Juneau's children, our community safety, and decimating jobs throughout Alaska's economy, driving families away from our great state. It's more important than ever to balance our budget and fund the things we value: good jobs, education, a stable workforce, safe neighborhoods for all. A sensible fiscal plan pays for these priorities and provides economic certainty so that Alaska can rebuild. My commitment to stabilize the economy and create jobs includes advocating for a sensible fiscal plan that provides stable funding for priorities like education, public safety, healthcare, reliable transportation, and more, preserving the permanent fund and guaranteeing a sustainable dividend, rebuilding our economy. You've heard, I really think we need to do a general obligation bond, finding efficiencies in healthcare. It drives a lot of our costs in school districts and in state government. We need to get a handle on that. We need to continue the expansion of Medicaid to improve the health of our communities and create good jobs. I believe we need to attract and retain our teachers, police officers, and other employees. And we need to look at returning to a defined benefits option. I want to make sure that we're addressing unnecessary roadblocks in state government that can make it harder to start or sustain a business in Alaska. We need to be looking at innovations. We need to be dealing with our pandemic situation. The health and economic effects of COVID are impacting Alaskans like we never could have imagined just a few months ago. Our economy, which has already been weakened by oil revenue reductions, is reeling. We're experiencing a great deal of uncertainty. I will continue to work hard to get financial relief to Alaskans, businesses, nonprofits, tourism, and retail industries. We need to continue, anyway, I appreciate so much the opportunity to serve you. Please make sure you vote in this election, and thank you for all you do for our community.
Thank you, Representative Story. I appreciate that. Really quickly, it looks like we will have a couple of minutes. So if any of our audience members have some questions they'd like asked, you can enter those in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And if we have some time, we'll ask a couple of extra questions. Try and keep them short, and we'll see if we can get to them. Ed, it is your turn to give us your closing statement, please.
Yeah, sure. And I don't think I need 3 minutes, so Andi can have some white time. The bottom line is that I think I'm the most qualified person for the task that we have at hand. Right now, we have an economic disaster on our hands, and I'm an economist, and I think that that's going to become very, very valuable during the next legislative session. I think Andi appreciate everything that she's done for our community. I think that right now, the skill sets that we need in the Capitol building are more aligned with the skills that I provide, which is the only reason why I'm running for this office. I've spent years studying our state's finances. I understand them. I have an advanced degree in economics. I have professional training in leadership and negotiation. I led a team of infantry soldiers to accomplish mission. I know how to get things done. I worked inside the administration. I worked in the Department of Revenue, the Department of Natural Resources, the Governor's Office, OMB. I've worked with those statutes. I've built those statutes. I've carried legislation through the Capitol building. I've prepared fiscal notes. I've analyzed policy. I know how to do this job, and I can do it well. I think I have a deep understanding of our laws and our lawmaking process, that I've testified as an expert witness on multiple topics to multiple committees. I have credibility with the people that are going to be in charge next year. I can get in the room on day one and start making progress for Juneau. And I just would point out one thing, just kind of closing. We haven't dealt with this situation, which is why we're in the situation that we're in now. Andy talked a little bit earlier about how every $1 billion of savings that you spend is $50 million of earnings that you lose. We've spent $20 billion out of our savings over the last 6 years. That's $1 billion a year that we would have right now if we didn't spend that money. We need to put structure in place now so that we can have a long-term financial plan and that we don't put our kids and grandkids in this type of situation. We need to solve it today, and we haven't done it yet. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm running, and that's why you should vote for me. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Ed. It looks like we might have Mike back. Are you with us, Mike?
I am. I do apologize. Sometimes internet access gets a little spotty where I'm at. So Eric, thank you so much for taking over. I'm leaving my video off just to hopefully preserve some bandwidth. But it appears we've just finished our closing statements.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. So we do have just a few more minutes. We have lots of participants. Looks like at least 45 folks watching in today. If you have a question for the candidates, please enter them into the Q&A screen and we'll pass those on. We don't have any in there right now, but I'm sure someone has a question for you.
Well, Mike, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll ask a question. What do each of you feel your role is as Juneau's legislator in terms of working with the local assembly, with Juneau's city assembly and the city in making Juneau a welcoming and workable capital city? How do you see your role as a legislator? What is your view of that? We'll start with Andy on that one.
Thank you. And I should let everyone know out there that your assembly is really on this. When we were elected, one of the first events I went to was the mayor reaching out, the manager having the delegation down there to talk about what are Juneau's priorities, community assistance, school bond debt reimbursement. They have been terrific when they know there's an issue coming up to let us know in the Capitol, and we have done the same thing. And I think that's what it takes is close communication. They've been very responsive. I hear of a lot of concerns from the community. Lots of times they're confused residents if it's a city issue or a state issue. And so it's really important to put them in touch with the mayor or the manager. And so lots of times you're a linkage between citizens and government, but it's close communication. It's knowing what your city priorities are. And it's with the coronavirus, they have been terrific to tell us what their needs are and working together really well. And I love how they've gotten our state monies that we gave them out to the people. And they've also talked about some capital projects that they would really like to see. As you know, our revenue has been so limited that we have not had big capital projects, but we have got things to go. If we did a general obligation bond, things to prioritize. So close communication, hands down. And I work really hard to make sure with all leaders and the governor that I have a good relationship and Juneau's welcoming, and we're so happy they're here.
Thank you. All right, Ed.
Yeah, I kind of echo that same sentiment. I think that it's important to acknowledge the fact that the constituents of a state legislator are the same constituents as the local assembly within the district. And so the root of everything that we're trying to solve is the same person, and it's the same tax base if we're talking about raising taxes. So we have to be really careful, both in terms of which level of government is the appropriate level to tackle the problem at hand, and also where is the right place to raise that kind of money and the interaction between the two. I think that that was one of the parts of the conversation that was missing 2 years ago when the governor introduced his first budget, is I don't think there was a recognition that some of the quote unquote cuts were really just cost shifting down to the municipality. And I think that when it comes down to it, you really have to understand how the budget works and how everything is kind of related to one another. You have to have that really close communication with the assembly. You have to you have to be the conduit to carry their concerns up to the Capitol, and vice versa, carrying the concerns or what you're hearing in the Capitol from around the state into the municipality. But at the end of the day, I think it's very, very important that you recognize that those constituents are the people that are in charge. They're the ones in both levels of governments. They're the ones that they are the government. The government is inherent in the people. And we need to be very, very careful that we're meeting their needs and not our own.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Thank you, Representative Story. Looks like we may have had some trouble with the Q&A function, but we have one question in the chat, and it's a simple yes or no answer. Do you support the road? There we go. Thank you. Appreciate that from both of you. And I know it's ground we covered earlier, but it's good to get that yes or no. We're right up against, maybe we have one pop through in the Q&A here. And let's see if we can keep the answers on this one less than a minute. But Alaska schools do relatively poorly compared to other states. Juneau schools do better than most districts in Alaska, but still not as well as we want. Some say accountability is the issue, which seems to mean no more funding for our K-12 system. How do we improve our schools in Alaska? If we will not fund them adequately, what can the legislature do to improve education outcomes? Representative Story, we'll start with, I know it's gonna be tough to do this one in a short answer, but let's give it a try.
We need to take a systems approach. All levels need to be working well together, which means early learning. We must strategically invest in that. That is getting our kids up to speed when they start school. We're not good about having them catch up once they get there, so let's have them come in. We need to make sure we are doing our career technical programs because that is our workforce. I cannot state that enough. I also know our university system is just critically important as we go ahead. This and two-year funding, that is a policy we have to have so districts can plan. The number one in-school factor that improves student learning is the quality of teachers. We've got to, and our staff, and we've got to have a system that keeps teachers here and not makes them feel appreciated, and it costs us money not to do that. So there's many things we can do, but we need to have those critical foundational pieces in place, and it's about a system, improving the system.
Thank you, Representative Story. Mr. King.
Yeah, and I think obviously Andi is kind of the expert in this field, and I would really enjoy listening to her and other experts and advocates for education on what works and what doesn't. But whatever we do, I think that we have to recognize that we are working towards a solution. We should be results focused, not financing focused. And I think that's kind of where the dialogue starts to break down a little bit when we talk about adequacy and when we talk about whether or not we're serving our community well. We need to make sure that we're using the correct value metric. It's not the most dollars per student is not the best way forward. It's what are the best results? That's what makes good schools. Are we getting our students prepared to enter the workforce and the economy and be functioning adults and good members of society? I think that that's critical. And like I said, I defer to the experts on how we get there.
Thank you, Mr. King. And I know we have one or two other questions sneaking through, but we are at 1 o'clock here. So thank you to both of our candidates for participating in today's forum. I really enjoyed listening to both of your answers, and I hope everybody did as well. I do know that if you have questions for them that weren't answered by either the chamber questions or we didn't get to them here at the end, both candidates will be happy to chat with you one-on-one. So send them an email or text them or call them, whatever it takes. So be sure to reach out to both of them and also thank them for running. It's tough to put your name in the hat. Both of them have done that, and we really appreciate you being willing to serve our community. So with that, that concludes our forum. Mr. Forrest, I'll turn it to you to conclude the session. Looks like you're still on mute, Eric.
Thanks, Mike. We'll get that figured out one of these days. Thank you. I'd like to echo that. I appreciate both Ed and Andy coming and joining us today and for running, because it does take a lot to put yourself out there. So we appreciate that. And we appreciate you coming to the chamber. I'd like to thank everybody that was joined us today. Thank you for joining us. And I also want to ask you to join us next Thursday, when our speaker will be our very own Ben Brown, talking about Perseverance Theater and what's going on with them during all this time. I know they've got a lot of new and innovative things happening, and we'll be happy to hear about that. So please join us for that. As for now, we are adjourned, and I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you.